Hello, my name is Decimus Claudius, and I am very happy to share with you my trip to ancient Lycia back in April and May of this year. Um, it took about 10 or 11 days, and it was quite exhausting in the fact that there were so many different mountains to climb and different ravines to traverse and boulders to cross. Um, and you could see me here smiling at this one site, but it was also very difficult to get to. So let's first start off with where is Lycia? And if you look at this map in one of my guidebooks, it is it's pretty much on the western side, but not fully on the western side, on the bottom. So, kind of a yeah, it's definitely on the coast, kind of like a corner. Now, it starts in Khmer, if you look on the right, all the way to a little peninsula on the left. Now, a lot of this is very mountainous regions where you have a lot of towns either directly on the coast or on a mountain near the coastline. And then inside, you just have occasional cities between tall mountains. So it's a very fortified area. And that's also why um, they were able to either repulse or be semi-independent of other empires uh, during some periods of time. Now, so the main ones, if you could see, um, are really are really though on the coast, especially once we get to towards the end on the left side, like Patara, Latun, Xanthos. Those are some of the most famous sites of them all. But yeah, why don't we start with a little history? Now, it's a lot of text, and so originally the first mention of uh, Lycia or Luca was in an Egyptian inscription in the 13th century, and it was also mentioned as an ally of Troy in Homer's Iliad. But then there's a dark age. So from between 1200 to 700 BC, there's no archaeological evidence. But afterwards, archaeologists have found that basically they were native Anatolians with limited contacts to other civilizations. Now, in 546 BC, um, the King Cyrus's general conquered several regions, including Lycia. There was some heavy fighting, but they had a partial autonomy. Um, in 480 BC, they also supported Xerxes against the Greeks. Um, Obviously, we know how that ended eventually. Um, Anyways, some of the cities of Lycia joined the Delian League. Now, when we say Lycia, sometimes we think about like the territory in the Roman times, but like obviously the border shifted, and that's why it's not always this monolith. Um, and it's interesting because eventually um, it was under Persian rule twice. The Lycian language went ceased from roughly 500 to 300 BC. Um, it's interesting. It's composed of 29 letters, 10 Greek, and 10 of them that are just unique. And we'll definitely see some inscriptions later. It's interesting that the words are divided by a semicolon because in some ancient inscriptions, the words blend together, but not this one. Um, so um, eventually, Alexander the Great conquered Lycia in 333. He stayed, for some time in different areas. And then you see Greek just completely replacing the Lycian language. You see more architecture resembling like Hellenistic um, styles. Um, Interestingly enough, it was conquered and controlled by the Ptolemaic dynasty for roughly 100 years, but it also becomes more Hellenistic. And the Ptolemies are famous for ruling Egypt. Eventually, it was conquered by the I don't know how to pronounce it, Seleucids, and then eventually became Roman. Um, No, it's interesting because it became part of the Lycian League, and it remained mainly autonomous for actually several hundred years. Eventually, it was conquered by the Turks in the 11th and 12th century. So that's a little bit of a background. Now, I want to just jump into a few religious items before we go into the tour. Now, I find it very interesting because, of course, you see many Greek and Roman temples and statues. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that aren't part of the normal Greek and Roman pantheon. For instance, this is in El Mali, and it is a stela depicting the 12 gods, which are apparently hunter gods, with a dog for each one. While the origins trace back to the Bronze Age, these type of stelae date to the 2nd to 4th century AD, and a theory is that they were brought back during the rise of Christianity. Although during the reign of Theodosius II, local cuts were forgotten and the pagan beliefs were banned. And the center inscription reads, "The 12 gods according to a command," and the name plus an image below, which might be a priest, official, or the person who dedicated the stele. Now, this is another one, same exact type. Everything is the same except for a different style and also a different name who dedicated it. But I did see several examples of this very unusual stele. This is in Andriake, and this on the left is a menorah panel from a synagogue for the small Jewish community of traders. It dates to the 4th or 5th century AD and is dedicated in Greek to the family members who set it up: Macedonius, Procles, Romanus, and Roma. So very interesting names for Jewish people. The synagogue on the right is in the front of a corner of Hadrian's granary. And it's interesting that Hadrian's granary was built in 129, 130 AD, which now houses the Museum of Lycian Civilizations. So it was a very prime location right in front of the harbor for this synagogue. Now in Demre, you could see the Church of St. Nicholas, which was originally built in the 6th century AD and expanded in the 11th century. And there are two saints with the same name that apparently have been blended together. There you can see wonderful frescoes, architectural designs, and even some Byzantine mosaics. Sailors in the Eastern Mediterranean prayed to him and carried an icon on their travels, which some believe can be seen as the belief in Poseidon being carried over to St. Nicholas. Although it is a stretch probably to people that belong to the Roman religion today. St. Nicholas's bones, though, were taken back to Italy in 1087, apparently due to Arab invasions. Now, so that was the religious part that I just wanted to get out of the way. So now we're going to the various places. This is also inside that church in Demre. So now we're going to the places that I visited on this trip. We're going from east to west, and this one is on Mount Chimera. And I actually took this picture in 2018. So I went there once at night in 2018, and once this year during the day. I definitely recommend it at night because it's just amazing to see and hear these natural flames, which are coal gas fires, which have been burning since antiquity. And during Roman times, a temple to Hephaestus was located there. And interestingly enough, a 5th century church was built next to these. And it's called Chimera after the fire-breathing beast. This town is Rhodiopolis, and one here can see a Roman theater with Hellenistic influence, which seated about 1,500 people. Behind is a reconstructed temple-like tomb of Opera Moas, a prominent and wealthy local who donated large amounts to places and people in Lycia, per the various inscriptions on the building in the first half of the 2nd century AD. Even correspondence with the Roman Emperor Antoninus Pius was inscribed. And later we'll see items that he either built or restored. And due to the inscriptions there, we know that he partially funded it. Now, in the Museum of El Mali, it's very interesting. It shows primarily a lot of items found in tombs over the years. Now, one can see some items from the 5th century BC, which look very Greek, up until on the left-hand side, some little trinkets from the Roman times. So they're very modest people that live there. I mean, there's not much riches in the graves in that in this part. So this is more of the inland part in between mountains. So it's interesting. Some of the graves, though, had before the Romans, there were some frescoes, but unfortunately, in the museum, they don't have any of the examples. Just statues and small items. Now, in the courtyard of the museum, they have different sarcophagi, and in Lycia, one sees thousands of sarcophagi. To be honest, in 10 or 11 days, I can't even count. Maybe if I saw 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 sarcophagi, graves, what have you. And these, so in this picture, you could see several ones. The main one has a stylized lion. Now, this one doesn't have a description, but one on the other side says that it's from Roman times, and they all look similar. So apparently this should be from Roman times as well. And off to the right is just a typical one type of sarcophagus that one sees. It's large but very plain, with a formulaic inscription in Greek on the front. So this is our Ari Kanda, and the name in the Luwian language is translated to place by the high rocks, and much of the city is on a very steep incline. So looking out, you could see in the other direction also mountains, and right here is a peristyle house. This is a tomb that belonged to a man named Makedo, and family members of his were also buried there from the 1st to 3rd centuries AD. This is the Great Baths, which measured 77 by 37 meters with a gymnasium attached. This is a fine tomb with a vaulted roof and a portrait of the original owner between 2 Nikes above the door. And this is inside that tomb. This stadium was about 117 meters long, but only has 3 rows of seating. And behind it is an older building with 8 niches. And my guidebook says it perhaps was a temple. Now we are in Limra, and this is a large cenotaph for Gaius Caesar, grandson of Augustus, that was covered in marble with fine life-size depictions, and it had a 4-sided pyramid roof. He died in Limra in 4 AD after getting wounded in Armenia, and his remains afterwards were taken to Rome. Now, this theater was originally from the first half of the 1st century BC, and it was partially destroyed in an earthquake in 141 AD, and was rebuilt with funds that included a 10,000 denarii donation from Opramoas of Rhodiopolis, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Now, these are rock-cut tombs in Myra, and some of them are depictions of Lycian houses. Other types of monumental Lycian tombs are large sarcophagi. Underneath the steps were burial chambers for relatives or slaves. We also see pillar tombs, which show earlier Lycian art, and also temple tombs. But these, however, are mainly the Lycian house type. Inscriptions in Lycian or Greek often state the name as well as the threat to Vandals that they will be cursed and have to pay a fine to the city or the Roman Empire treasury if it was vandalized. A total of 104 rock-cut tombs have been found in the several necropoli of Myra, dating from the 4th century BC. 23 of them have inscriptions, of which 13 are in Lycian and 10 are in Greek. Some even have impressive carved reliefs with family members, deities, or warriors, but one isn't allowed to go up without permission, so it's only possible to see them really in books. In the zoomed in picture, one could make out with some difficulty a few of the reliefs. For instance, slightly to the right and slightly above, you could see a big circle and a shield. This is an example of one of the tombs with a Greek inscription. This is a Roman-style theater that could seat almost 11,500 spectators. So it's one of the largest in the region. Now, if you look from where I took this picture from the back rows, you could see some of the rock-cut tombs. Now, this is Andriache. And one could see here harbor structures and honorary monuments with plenty of inscriptions on the other side facing the sea. And it had sea access before the coastline changed. Interestingly enough, it had three votes in the Lycian League, signifying its importance. And just on the hill right behind where I took this picture, one could see the synagogue and the granary. Now, this is a customs inscription. Obviously, it's kind of faded in Greek, and I can't read it, but they have a very interesting explanation here about the information. So it could be dated to 60 to 63 AD, and it's very interesting with the special customs, and you could see what was traded in this port, like purple, saffron, tar, oil, fig, and probably fish. It's interesting that they even mentioned statues of cities. And just a lot of other important things regarding customs and edicts. Unfortunately, there wasn't a line-by-line translation, but this definitely has a good summary of that. This is the town of Knidos, I believe how one pronounces it. And one has to actually hike up a lot, and it's not very easy to get to, but it's a wonderful setting with great views if you go along the ridges. There's plenty of tombs all around. These happen to date to the Roman times and are near the theater. And this is a theater that fit about 2,500 people. Very well preserved for such an abandoned place. And here are some goats, and the area is still used for grazing. Now we are in Sura, and on the left is a single monument with a sarcophagus on top of a house-type tomb, which dates to about 350 BC. To the right, one needs, to the right, you could see me there. I actually had to hike up and jump down to where I am. Some places are actually very dangerous that I visited, just due to the boulders or just steep cliffs. Some places I thought it was too dangerous, and I didn't even attempt. So from here, yeah, I had to literally jump down and jump actually from a few different ledges. So not very easy, especially if you're scared of heights like I am. Anyways, on the right is a tomb for a man called Mizretije and his wife. And here's an inscription in the Lycian language, which I mentioned earlier. And that's why we know the man's name. Like I said before, you could definitely pick out some Greek letters, but also some very unique letters. And we're going to see a few more Lycian inscriptions later in the presentation. Now, this is in necropolis of Sura, and these are two stelae bearing the names of priests of Apollo Surius. It was probably surrounded by walls, which are no longer remaining. They date to about the 3rd century AD. So apparently, from those stelae, there were ancient stairs that could be taken down to the temple of Apollo, one could see in the valley below, which could have been seaside in antiquity and was once an oracle center mentioned by Greek and Roman sources due to the fish involved. After trying for half an hour to go over the boulders to go down into the valley, due to large crevices, unwieldy plants, very sharp, jagged edges, unfortunately, I had to give up. I did rescue a lost baby goat, though, which was quite an achievement. Now, this is from a different approach. I was also unsuccessful, but one could see on the left-hand side the Temple of Apollo, or a corner of the building. On the right-hand side is a Byzantine church, but unfortunately, it was just too difficult to get down there. This is the town of Simena. It's the top of a hill, and one could see a Byzantine castle from this angle, but it also has ancient and medieval ruins blended together, much like on the island of Kakova across the water. Now, this is the smallest theater in Lycia with a capacity of only 210 people. And this was enclosed inside that Byzantine castle. Although this is, I'm not sure if it's from Greek or Roman times. Due to the earthquakes and changing sea level, one can swim or wade out to this Lycian sarcophagus now in the water. Per my guidebook is a bathhouse nearby with an inscription dedicated to the Emperor Titus that also makes reference to the Union of Apperle, which was a union of several cities together having a vote in the Lycian League. But unfortunately, I couldn't find that bathhouse. Now, I took a private boat over to that island, and along the waterline, there were many different structures along the waterline, but one can't quite make out what the structures are and if they're Roman or Byzantine. But we probably went on a boat several kilometers along the island. So, and one sees a lot of structures. So this one is Timusa, or I believe that's how one pronounces it. And one sees various tombs from the Hellenistic or Roman times along the water. Some of them even have an exedra in front, like this one. And one could see a very good Greek inscription there. This is in Tiberissos, and one could see a rock-cut Lycian tomb dating to 400 BC, resembling a sarcophagus tomb. Above the entrance, one could see a male and female figure carved in. The Lycian inscription is below the broken-off entrance door. The picture on the lower right shows the burial chamber inside the tomb. This is Apollonia, and it's another secluded ruin, which was also part of the Union of Apperle. This theater could hold up to 650 people. Tombs and portions of buildings are very overgrown, and I had to ask another tourist where the theater was, since it was extremely hidden in this ruin. And one could see the wonderful views, and there were actually no signs to go up there. So one had to park the car a ways away and just look up the mountain and just kind of guess how to get up. Now, this is a monumental tomb with lions on the lid, and those lions were actually used to lift up the lid. Now, this is in Cass, which is the ancient Antiphelos. It's a restored theater with seating for about 2,800 spectators, and overlooking the water, one could see the modern-day Greek island of Castellorizo, which is a little bit off to the right. This is actually quite unusual. This is a Lycian tomb with a corresponding Lycian inscription below. However, it was reused in Roman times and bears an inscription in Latin above. And this was the only Latin inscription on a tomb I saw on the entire trip. In Cass, there were over 100 ancient sarcophagi that were recorded in 1842, although most of them were subsequently destroyed for building material, unfortunately. But a few ones remain scattered around town. This is Xanthos, which is one of the most important cities in ancient Lycia. Numerous fine monuments from that town were taken to the British Museum with permission from the Ottoman Empire, actually. Here one can see the Agora and the 2nd century AD theater that could sit about 2,200 people, and it was restored with funds from Opromoas of Rhodiopolis. This is another angle of the theater with two monumental tombs. The one on the right is called the Harpy tomb for King Hybernus, known for a depiction of a bird woman. The white marble reliefs at the top were taken to London and replaced by replicas in 1957. This exhibits Hellenistic work at the end of the Archaic period and dates to about 480 BC. On the left is a pillar tomb with a sarcophagus on top. Inside the pillar, archaeologists found inside a vase made of Egyptian tile depicting Bernie, wife of Ptolemy II, in jewelry. Nevertheless, there were several burials over the centuries, although the original one was first used in the 6th century BC there. This is the part of the Xanthos obelisk, and it's a pillar originally 9.7 meters tall of mainly Lycian inscriptions on all sides. It has not been fully deciphered, except a short Greek section mentioning that Gerges killed several Arcadian hoplites in one day, among other feats. Reliefs of war scenes were on the top of the obelisk. It dates to roughly 400 BC, was used in the 19th century to gain more knowledge of the Lycian language, and part of it are actually in several different museums. This is the lid of a Lycian tomb called the Dancer's Sarcophagus. It shows a fallen warrior slipping off a horse while the victor stands on a raised platform and dates to the 4th century BC. There are many tombs with interesting reliefs from Lycia. However, the best ones are all obviously in museums. So one sees the second-rate reliefs. This is in Latoon, and it's an astonishingly well-preserved theater from the 2nd century BC, which could fit about 5,700 people. Due to the sarcophagi next to these tunnels, it was believed that a road actually ran through the theater. In the foreground, here in Latoon, one could see the monumental fountain and the sacred road with a temple each to Letu, Artemis, and Apollo to the right. This was a very important place of worship that originally dated to the 7th century BC, although most of the structures here date to the Roman times. And one could even see a partially destroyed and they were partially destroyed to build a church on site in the 6th century. This is inside the Temple of Leto, which was a sacred cult center of the Lycian League. Here there was a pronaos of 2 columns in front of a cella. This second temple on the site was originally built in the 4th century BC with friezes from the 2nd century BC. This is the best preserved of the 3 temples next to each other there, and was perhaps used somehow in Christian times. Nevertheless, no altars have been found in front of the temples. Patara was a very important city in Lycia, which housed the parliament of the Lycian League, and this is a monumental city gate. This is a theater. It was originally Hellenistic and repaired in Roman times, which could seat up to 6,000 people. One has a good view of the parliament building of the Lycian League, dated to the late Hellenistic period. A bit behind it is the main street, and off to the right is the city basilica. This is in front of the parliament building of the Lycian League. This is actually so this is inside that building. However, eventually the Lycian League was dissolved, and this building became an Odeon. And then in late antiquity, actually all the entrances were blocked up and became part of the city walls. And interestingly enough, you could see goats at the bottom, and it's on top. They're on top of these glass panes to preserve the original floor. Now, this is the inscription on Hadrian's granary in Patara, which is different from a different Hadrian's granary that we've seen. And this is the main street in Patara. On the left, one could see the harbor baths, and on the right is the palm grove of Leto. The picture on the left is actually a stunning Corinthian-style temple dating to perhaps the 2nd century AD in Patara, and it's supposed to be one of the best preserved temples in the whole region. On the right is an aqueduct outside the city that stretched for several kilometers and brought water into Patara. Now, this is in Sidima. These ruins are very difficult to access. One has to drive quite a ways so on poor roads, and then one has to hike a considerable amount to go to the bottom of this hill, and then one has no idea where actually the theater is. I was actually looking for the theater for at least half an hour on this hillside until I finally found it. If you look at the bottom of the picture, you could see several banks of seating. But like I said, it was extremely difficult to find after a very long hike. Interestingly enough, it has a very good view. You could even see the snow-capped mountains afar, off to the left-hand side. Now, this is actually a monumental tomb. Unfortunately, there wasn't a sign, so I'm not sure if it was Roman or Hellenistic. You could see human figures carved inside it. It wasn't too tall, but I didn't see anything comparable on my trip to these carvings inside the tomb. This is Pinara, and it had 3 votes in the Lycian League, so it was a more important city back then. And the name derives from the Lycian word for circle, In this picture, one could see countless rock-cut tombs of a necropolis, some of which still have decorations. Um, it's absolutely an amazing sight. To be honest, I have no idea how one could get up there today. And I'm not sure if in ancient times they started from the top and worked down or vice versa. Um, but it was just an amazing sight to behold. And this is one of the various burial grounds there. This is a theater in Patara from the second century AD, sat about 3,000 people. And also it has great views from all sides. Now we're looking at Tlos, looking towards the stadium with a pool in the middle, which was 72 meters long, 8.3 meters wide, and 1 meter deep, which is kind of unusual to be in a stadium. One could also see in this picture an agora, small bath and palestra, a basilica, and lastly a theater, which could see about 5,600 people. This is looking at the stadium, or sorry, this is a seating tribune of the stadium on the base of the Acropolis. In Tlos, they also have a temple of Kronos. Now, this is a Roman dating roughly to the 2nd century BC. And due to inscriptions, we know that there was a festival called the Chronia every year there. Now we're looking towards the Acropolis, where we could see another agora, shops, and also rock-cut tombs on the slopes. So not only at the very top on the right, but also stretching downwards, trailing off to the right, and on different sides as well. One could see these rock-cut tombs. This tomb in Telmessos, ancient Telmessos, modern day Fethiye, is very well known due to its state of preservation. And the rock-cut tomb was for Amintas, and we know that because there's a Greek inscription. It was dated roughly to 350 BC, and even imitation iron nail heads were carved inside. So it's very ornate, resembling a temple. Now, many pictures online show graffiti. Thankfully, when I was there, they just removed the graffiti, so one couldn't see any major traces of it. And when I talk about graffiti, I mean very hideous spray paint graffiti, all on the inside and outside of it. And so inside, one doesn't see much, just some traces of graffiti scratched into the walls. And so 3 banks. This is in the ancient city of Kadianda, or in Lycian inscriptions, it was called Karawanti. And these ruins were spread out, and it was a moderately sized city, and it's almost completely overgrown and covered by large trees. It was actually one of the few opportunities to get out of the sun. This stadium was astonishingly 185.5 meters long and has 6 visible rows of seating. In addition to a theater, temples, and Roman buildings, various type of Lycian tombs can be seen around this hill, and very, very unusual to see it just all underneath these trees. Now, this is Kaunos, and it's a city which in ancient times belonged both to Lycia and the neighboring region of Caria, depending on the time. One can see a cluster of rock tombs cut into the cliff, and it's in front of a river that one needs to cross to go to the ancient city. So these are all in Hellenistic temple form and date to between the 4th and 2nd centuries BC. Off on the right, one could even see the largest temple that was not finished. But it's very interesting to see how it was built or carved in ancient times. So obviously they went from the top down. This is the Harbor Agora fountain, which had a long descriptions of custom laws on the outside. And it dates originally to about the 3rd century BC. This is a temple terrace and round structure. And on the diagram off to the right, one could see the various layers of the site that archaeologists have identified. At the bottom is a sacred stone representing Basileus Kaunios, the so-called god king of Kaunos. On top of that is a heroon. So archaeologists have determined that the place was a sacred area by the end of the 5th century BC at least. On top of that was built this temple terrace in the 1st century BC. And additionally, in a corner of this terrace, a 6th century AD church was built. And also in the picture, one could see towards the top the coastline. Now, I did have to take a quite detour. Now, this is not in Lycia. It's actually in Caria, a neighboring region. And it was a very long drive to the very tip of a peninsula to go to Knidos, which is an absolutely incredible site worth many hours of driving. So this is part of a Hellenistic theater overlooking one of the harbors. The theater is actually much larger than what the picture shows, but only a portion of it was reconstructed. One could see here various structures, including a stoa and the temple of Dionysus in the middle. And this overlooks another harbor. And one could see also a gate at the harbor entrance, and behind that, a modern lighthouse. Now, this is a round temple, and some people believe that it is the temple that housed the very famous statue of Aphrodite of Knidos in antiquity. And many people wrote about it. Now, obviously, not everybody agrees with it because there's no 100% definitive evidence that this was the temple, but it was a round temple and it was in the city, and it checks all the other boxes, and also ships could see it from the harbor. So that's why, some people believe that that statue was in this very temple. So on the left, one could see the exedra of Symmachos. I believe it was from Roman times, with plenty of inscriptions inside. To the right, interestingly enough, is a granite stone, and it was close to this exedra and that central portion. And on the stone, which was carved in roughly 550 BC, one can see a graffiti of a man and a woman, perhaps in a scene of embrace. And very unusual to see, especially since it wasn't in a museum or anything. It was just out in the elements for such an old and interesting inscription. Now, going back towards Lycia, I stopped in Marmaris, went to a archaeological museum. On the left, one could see just various funerary stones. One could also see a stele with the 12 gods. On the right-hand side, one could see a very nice portrait head in marble, and I found that the hairstyle, which was very intricate, was definitely worth mentioning. So everything here was from Roman times. Now, this is on my very last day in a town called Balbora. And this is actually the highest city in all of Lycia. And it's today composed of scattered ruins on several hills. And I actually spent almost an hour trying to find the upper theater, which I had to give up. On the left-hand picture, almost towards the top, below the final tree line, one could see the outside of the theater. So I was on that hill, but unfortunately, I didn't have exact GPS coordinates that were accurate. I found some online, but they only showed the hill, not that exact spot. So after very difficult climbing and hiking, I had to give up. Then on the way out, I saw the lower theater, and from the lower theater, I could see the upper theater. But since, as you could see here, it's way too dangerous just to hike up there due to these cliffs, I decided not to. I also did some dangerous hikes and jumping and what have you already. And on my last day, I didn't want to press my luck anymore. And the picture on the right is an example of many in these ruins. I believe that they were already partially excavated illegally, and just tons of things were sarcophagi were just, here and there without any explanation. Now one could see that there was a couple, probably the heads were knocked off. The couple like on the lid, probably dating to Roman times. And this site, like I said, was on several hills, just really strewn. And in the middle, you would see animals grazing. Now, I've gone slightly over time, so I'm just going to go briefly on the last city. It's Kibera, very amazing. You can see this stadium. Now on the right hand side, the seats are very well intact, and also you see the wall on the right. And I actually tried to find a way to go from the stadium up the hill, but actually that old wall is still standing, and you can't get up there. And off to the left, just amazing views of the valley. And let me just briefly scroll through these. Yeah, a main road and a monumental fountain. And here, it's either a theater or an Odeon. On the left-hand side, you could see some very interesting mosaics. One of them has a large inscription in Greek, and on the right, you could see a very colorful, intricate depiction of Medusa. However, I was there right after the sun dipped below a portion of the wall. So that's why in the foreground you could still see the colors appearing, with sunlight, and right behind it, like with the face of Medusa, it's already in the shade. And that was the very last city on my visit. And I thank you all for hearing about my adventures through the former Roman province of Lycia. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that interesting presentation. What I'm going to suggest is that if people have questions, so there is a raise your hand feature. If you go to the, I believe it's in the chat area. So if you have a question, please use the raise your hand. And then when your question has been answered, then you can lower your hand.
So just a quick question to kick things off. What were your first impressions?
Mine?
Yeah.
For anybody. So I was personally shocked at just how many ruins there are. Like, even if they're not in great levels of preservation, there's just a ton, it seems like, in that area.
Absolutely correct.
I was also curious, I guess, about the level of signage that there was there? Because you obviously had explanations for a lot of things, and you were by yourself pretty much. So like, how were you getting the information you had?
Well, I was actually there with my girlfriend, and she did most of the driving, and I did most of the research. And I have um, an amazing guidebook um, called "On the Lycian Way," which I picked up in an official official museum shop in Turkey. Of and I actually bought it last year. I'm not sure if it was in Ephesus or one of these museum shops, and I got it not thinking that I'm going to go there this year, but just because it had so many interesting Roman places. I was like, I want to go there some year. And when I was thinking about places to go this year, I was like, oh, I have that guidebook. Let me take a look at it. And it's so informative. And it was actually a lifesaver because most of the places have no descriptions. And in the book, it doesn't have any GPS, but sometimes it says, it's like 2 kilometers northwest of this village. And then I could go on Google and then I could, kind of eyeball it. And or like sometimes it'll tell me, where to park the car and sort of stuff like that. So I don't think I could have seen so many ruins if it wasn't for this book. And I also think that if I had a month, I could have seen all the ruins to see because I left out a huge amount of ruins. I actually only saw the highlights. There's so many ruins that I could have seen that I wanted to see, but just within 11 days, it wasn't practical. So I do see a hand raised. So yeah, what is your question?
May I?
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Forgive me, I have some bad connection of internet, so I was thrown out during your speech. I am teaching Roman law at the university, and in the very beginning of your speech, you have mentioned this table, which you have found in one of the first Lycian cities.
Yes.
Could you say something more about it? And if you found any similar remnants of the Roman legal culture in this area when you're walking through the mountains, or these old remnants of the cities, or it was only one single example of such edictum,
Sure.
I suppose.
So when it came to this here, let me just pull it up. So this custom inscription, it is sort of unique, but not exactly, because if you remember later on in my presentation, I mentioned that there was on a fountain, the harbor fountain. I believe it was in Kaunos. There was actually a custom inscription outside. However, this one was much more detailed, specifying so many things. For instance, there's like a right of distraint or seizure of deposit, or what happens when somebody understates you know, their taxes, or if they do customs or tax evasions. I mean, there's several edicts of Nero. For instance, one is a time constraint on petitions to a taxman, and then another one is the prevention of illegal money damages of the Demosian noise. And then the last one was an obligation to expose publicly the laws. So this specific inscription has 87 rows that one could make out. And it's interesting because it also says that just due to the importance of some of the items, one could tell that the principal sources of income there were like the murex dye, like the purple dye, solid cedar pine resin, saffron, liquid cedar pine resin, olive oil, figs, and fish. A lot of things there we just know by reading the specific inscription. And like I said, to my knowledge, there's nothing that comes close in this region to this customs inscription.
Well, may I have another question?
Sure.
Concerning, you know, My question is connected with the fact that, as you mentioned in the very beginning of your speech, that Lycia has been incorporated to the Roman Empire as a classical province very lately, comparing to the neighboring areas. Previously, it was the part of this federation under the Rhodos leadership, hegemony. And after 200 years, it was incorporated to the form of classical Roman province during, as I remember, during the Claudius. So it was more or less 40 Anno Domini. So I was asking about it because during this 200 years of this, how to say, client federation state of the Roman Empire, the legal system in Lycia was very specific. It was mixed of Greek law from the Hellenistic time, some kind of Roman local customary law, and of course the influences of the jus gentium, this common part of Roman law, because it's preserved the status of the client state, not as a part of the Roman province. Especially, I have found some information that during, but of course I found it in Wikipedia during your speech. It was not my previous knowledge. That the status of Lydia was so interesting that even the founding fathers of the United States Constitution were interested in this matter. So it was one of the strange examples how the ancient constitutional legal culture could influence present day times. So this is my question connected with this example of the legal remnants. So, but you don't know, or maybe you mentioned, but I can't hear from which period of the time was this inscription you have mentioned. It was the
Nero.
Nero.
So the specific, so obviously I have to go with what the site says, but the site dates it between the year 60 and 63.
1663.
Because
Anno Domini, so it was after Claudius' incorporation. Yeah.
Exactly. Nero's the emperor after Claudius. So, and there's 3 direct edicts from Nero, and then the other ones were just various items of just various laws. So, but 3 of them had directly Nero's name attached to them.
Yeah. But do you know, I mean, maybe what was the formal status of the author of this edictum or this table? It was the prefectus or proconsul or something like this, or there was not
actually
mentioned?
Yes, it is mentioned. So the name of C. Licinius Mucianus and is mentioned on there, and he's known to have been the governor of Lycia during the reign of emperor, and he is on the 3rd row of the 87 rows that one could identify, and
but there was mentioned the formal title because you know, for example, as I know, there is a huge discussion. What was the proper title of the Pontius Pilatus? He was the prefectus of the Judea, or he was a kind of envoy, or maybe he was a governor in the rank of proconsul or propraetor. So this is why I'm asking if there is any mention what was the rank of the governor.
Unfortunately, I don't have that information because on this on the sign of the customs inscription, it has a lot of detailed information, but it doesn't have a word-for-word translation, unfortunately. So it shows, it says that in rows 1 through 4 is the prescriptum, and then inside that prescriptum on line 3 was mentioned in C. Licinius Mucianus, and it says who is known to have been the governor of Lycia during the emperor. So it doesn't say definitively like he was the emperor, just we know that he was through other sources. So I'm not sure if some official title was mentioned. Probably it wasn't if if it's, since it says he was known to have been the governor of Lycia.
Yeah, thank you a lot. So my congratulations. It was a very interesting speech. I heard it with a great pleasure. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's a huge pleasure for me to hear. We have plenty of time. Are there any other questions from the audience or comments?
I do have questions, but I want to wait to see if anybody else has.
I guess it's your turn.
Okay, so I had two questions, whether you might know answers for or not. But I noticed that there were some common motifs on a lot of the sarcophagi.
Absolutely.
So a lot of them have it looks like sunbursts on them, like on the end caps.
Yes, especially the one with the lions on the lid.
Yeah.
Now, in my book, sometimes, depending on the style, one knows that it's Lycian. Other times, when it's less steep and a little bit flatter, normally is an indication that it's Roman. However,
Okay.
there is a transition period, so it's not always clear. I did read I did see that there was like a sun depiction, but I didn't know exactly why that was on the sarcophagus.
Okay. Yeah, I also noticed, so a few of them had crosses or what looked like crosses on them.
Definitely not a cross.
Yeah, because it looked pretty. It was a little confusing because the date didn't make any sense. But I was kind of curious about that. I also noticed that in one of the pictures from the museum, I think that you showed, there was a little Abraxas medal, or gem, actually. It was like one of the very first pictures that you showed. So
Oh yes.
it's interesting. So it's interesting that there were, these Gnostic people in Lycia when the majority of that was going on in Greece, or not in Greece, but in Egypt. So I'm curious whether people were moving around or whether the religion was spreading.
Well, I'm not sure exactly, to be honest with you. I haven't really studied it that much. What it is apparent, though, is that due to the geography, so the mountains, Lycia many times was semi-autonomous. However, there was a lot of cultures that came and went. Or so, like for instance, like Hellenistic or Egyptian, also, but only some items. So there were definitely trade. I also read that so at least in some of these major towns, they were a hub of commerce for the region. So there was actually also inward migration. So,
Okay.
but it's also hard to see, how much influences, how much migration there was. I mean,
Yeah.
that's always one of the tricky ones. And also, especially in Roman times, because once we get into like later in the imperial things, things get much more uniform.
Mm. Okay, I had one last question, and I'm not sure if it's a function of just like how you were taking pictures or whatever, but it seemed like the stadia that you went to were really, really narrow.
Exactly.
Is that real? No space for somebody to turn around in it.
Yeah, and interestingly, they were different lengths, so it's not like a standard stadium of today. So some of them were wider, some of them were narrower, some of them were shorter, some of them were longer. I'm not sure why, to be honest with you. I believe like that you could have not just a foot race in the stadium, but you could have other types of events going on as well, though.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I
it's
guess
also interesting.
I was about people just being on foot. I'm thinking about chariots.
Oh no, that's a circus.
Okay, so these are completely different things then.
Yeah, these are completely different. Like these are for like running or athletic
Okay.
competitions, and like a circus is with chariots. And I didn't see a single place with a circus. I mean, that would only
Got it.
be in like, so in the provinces, it would only be in the largest cities, and maybe they had one in Patara or another one. I just didn't happen to see it or read about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that there were so many theaters, though. Like basically everywhere you went, there was at least one.
Exactly. And a lot of these times you didn't see the bouleuterion. So like the small buildings for like the council of the city that you see in some other Greek towns, you only saw like a theater. So I'm not sure if the theaters were dual purpose or just due to time, the bouleuterions kind of disappeared or building materials were used and just these much grander, larger theaters were preserved.
Hmm. Okay, well that kind of wraps up my questions.
Sure. If there are there any other questions, or are we good to go?
So I would suggest that if there aren't any other questions, we should probably we'll stop the recording, and then we can discuss what we might like to do for next month.